Questions without notice. The member for Kingston. Oh, sorry, just before we begin, the Prime Minister's, I think, with some ministerial arrangements.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Apologies to the House and the member. I inform the House that the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship, Migrant Services and Multicultural Affairs will be absent for question time today and for the remainder of the week. The Minister for Population, Cities and Urban Infrastructure will answer questions on his behalf as the Acting Minister. The Minister for Education will be absent from question time today and tomorrow, and the Minister for the Environment will answer questions on his behalf.
I thank the Prime Minister and I call the member for Kingston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Under the childcare scheme the Prime Minister personally designed, the childcare subsidy is capped for families with a combined income of more than $189,000. Why does the Prime Minister consider families with a combined income of over $189,000 rich?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker. The reheat of the former Leader of the Opposition's rhetoric in this place seeking to introduce class wars again, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker,
members on my left,
is of no great surprise. Mr Speaker, our government has always believed that when you're applying support across the Australian community, that measures should be means-tested. And the program that we designed to put in place to support families across, Mr Speaker, the Australian population was means-tested. It was means-tested, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, and the other thing we do, Mr Speaker, is we ensure that when we means-test these arrangements, is we target it to those who need it most, and that is low and middle incomes. And that is where our childcare support, which runs to $9.2 billion per year, is designed to help those who need it most. Mr Speaker, so we can target that support to where it is most needed. See, that is how you responsibly run a budget, Mr Speaker. You target your support, you target to the challenges that are there, Mr Speaker, to ensure that it has the greatest impact. That's what we do. Right across the government services, we means-test any number of services, Mr Speaker, that are provided across the community, and we will continue to do that. But I'll tell you what we do for all Australians, Mr Speaker. We give all Australians lower taxes. That's what we do. And whether you're on a higher income or you're on a lower income, Mr Speaker, we believe all Australians work hard, and we don't tell them how to spend their money, Mr Speaker, because they earned it. And when they own it, we want them to keep more of it, Mr Speaker. Last time we were in this place, the Leader of the Opposition made a whole bunch of promises totalling up billions of dollars, and he wouldn't tell Australians how they'd pay for it. We found out soon after, Mr Speaker. Once again, the Leader of the Opposition wants to say to those Australians through whom in this place we have made law tax cuts for them so they can keep more of what they earn. This Leader of the Labor Party, just like the last one, can't wait to get his hands on their money by taking away their tax cuts.
I call the member for Longman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House how the Morrison government's plan for economic recovery is delivering support for Australian business, especially small and medium businesses, to create more jobs and drive our economic recovery from the COVID recession?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Longman for his question. It was great to be with him last week, Mr Speaker, up in Queensland. And right across Queensland I found, as is indeed the case right across the country, that the budget the Treasurer delivered here and the week before last has been extremely well received right across the country. So much so that off the back of the budget that Australia needed and the budget that has been delivered for all Australians, confidence surged, Mr Speaker, 12% in October. 12% in October, to its highest level in more than 2 years. And Bill Evans, the well-known chief economist and respected all around the country, said this: "This is an extraordinary result, and such a development must be attributable to the response to the October federal budget." He said it was a stunning lift in confidence around job security. And that's what the budget that was released by the Treasurer in this place was designed to do and is already doing. But, Mr Speaker, it wasn't just that. As I was in Queensland and I went up to Caboolture smash repairs, Mr Speaker, in the member for Longman's electorate, and I had the opportunity to meet Ian Wust. Ian, on the day before we announced JobKeeper, he had a small smash repairs business there, some 22 staff, had sadly already decided to let 4 of his employees go. He'd written the letter and he was going to lay them off the next day, Mr Speaker. And the next day, the Treasurer and I announced the government's decision on JobKeeper. Correct. Not only have those 4 young Australians, Mr Speaker, still got their jobs, correct, but he's also been able to keep in place all of his other staff, and he has since, Mr Speaker, employed a fitter named Elia and 1 detailer, Darren Briggs, since JobKeeper was introduced. Mr Speaker, he's put in place and kept jobs in place for young men and young women working in his business, and that was a game changer. But the other thing I learnt from Ian, Mr Speaker, is his business has graduated from JobKeeper and he no longer leads it, and he will no longer be needing it, and he's paying all his staff, and he's moving forward like so many other businesses as they're graduating out of JobKeeper as a result of the economic plan that our government has set out. Our plan, Mr Speaker, is not to keep businesses dependent on the government. Our plan, Mr Speaker, is to ensure those businesses can grow beyond the need of support by the government, Mr Speaker. The opposition wants to keep them cocooned by government, Mr Speaker. We want them to be able to go out there, Mr Speaker, and build their businesses again, which those businesses are doing. Those opposite might understand that, Mr Speaker, but we do. And that's why the budget has been so well received by Australians all across the country. It's given them the confidence, Mr Speaker, to plan for their future with confidence.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that for many Australian families, if the second income earner goes to work for the 4th or 5th day in the week, they lose money because of the childcare scheme he designed? How did the Prime Minister rack up $1 trillion of Liberal debt and still not fix his childcare scheme, which holds Australian parents back from working extra days?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The childcare support that we put in place, some $9.2 billion a year, and from the time we redesigned the scheme, the cost of childcare, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, fell by just over 3%. The level of labour force participation rose to record levels, and in particular, labour force participation amongst women raised to record levels, and the gender pay gap fell to record lows, Mr Speaker. That was the impact of the childcare changes that we put in place, Mr Speaker. And the member asked questions about what it means, Mr Speaker, for Australians who want to go to work for that extra day and earn a bit more money. Well, I'll tell you, the tax plan that we brought into this parliament, that we took to the last election, that said to Australians in particular, earning just as much as $45,000 a year, that they would never have to see bracket creep in their life ever again, and that they would pay a rate of tax of no more than 30 cents in every extra dollar they earn, Mr Speaker. That's what we went to the last election on. That's what was supported by the Australian people.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On direct relevance, Mr Speaker, the question asks about the impact on working the 4th or 5th day of the childcare centre. Both parts of the question refer specifically to that, and I ask the Prime Minister to be relevant to it.
Yes, but there was more to the question than just that, and I think the Manager of Opposition Business would have a point if it didn't have the political commentary. Well, I'm not going to repeat it. And I think, even withstanding that, the Prime Minister's in order when he's talking about affordability. But when questions have those taglines on, it does open it up. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So, under the tax plan that was supported by the Australian people at the last election, that was legislated in this parliament, much to the backing and forth from the opposition who were for it and against it and for it and against it, Mr Speaker, Australians know they can trust the government when it comes to managing the economy, Mr Speaker. They know they can trust the government when we say we want to ensure people keep more of what they earn, that we follow through on that. And, Mr Speaker, and we legislated that here in this parliament, and Australians know that every extra dollar they earn, they'll get taxed less on it by our government than by the Labor Party. And that's what they can have confidence about, that the more effort they put in, the more they'll be able to succeed. Already, the leader of the Labor Party has in his sights taking back the hard-earned earnings, Mr Speaker, of Australians earning as little as $45,000 a year, Mr Speaker. He wants to take their tax cut off them because, you know, when Labor wants to spend, they always want a tax.
The member for Eden Monaro, member for Whitlam. Notice we have more people in the chamber and the interjections are more frequent and loud. I'll deal with them in the normal way. The member for Flynn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government plans for jobs is supporting regional Australia, particularly my state of Queensland, through the continued rollout of infrastructure?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Flynn for his question, Mr Speaker. Before he came into this place, Mr Speaker, he was a fuel distributor for 20 years, and his trucks rumbled along the Bruce Highway, Mr Speaker. They rumbled along the dusty roads, they rumbled along the bitumen roads, Mr Speaker. Rest assured, we're building better and safer roads, and the member for Flynn is having something to do about that. He was a publican, he was a timber and hardware merchant. He knew how to employ people, he knew the value of small business. And he contributes mightily to this place, Mr Speaker, and continues to speak up for and on behalf of the small businesses in his electorate, for regional Queensland. And Prime Minister and I were there in regional Queensland last week. Didn't see the Leader of the Opposition there, but we were there. We were there, out there talking about the budget, Mr Speaker. We were out there talking about jobs. We were out there talking about what makes the regions tick, Mr Speaker. And they were very delighted. They were very delighted to see us. They were very delighted in the Treasurer's budget, $110 billion of infrastructure rollout, supporting 100,000 jobs. And whether it's the little pub in a far-flung corner of regional Queensland that's benefiting from a grader driver staying there because we're upgrading the roads, whether it's somebody in a high-rise metropolitan office block doing the geotechnics for a particular road, perhaps the Bruce Highway, they are contributing to our $110 billion pipeline. And this project, the Gladstone Port Access Road extension in the member's electorate, it is delivering. It is delivering jobs, both indirect and direct. It is delivering investment and economic security for the Gladstone region, just like the member for Flynn did when he was a businessman, Mr Speaker. So I've said before, an investment in infrastructure
member
is
for
an
Griffith
investment,
is now warned.
and so they should be. And an investment in small business, in local industry and manufacturing. How dare interrupting me when I'm on fire about infrastructure? They should be listening. They should be cheering at home, Mr Speaker, because we know, and the people in central Queensland, they know just how important. They haven't heard it from the member for Grainler. He wasn't there. Prime Minister and I were there. We were talking it up. All we hear from those opposite is negativity. But they should be out. They should be out talking about the local roads and community infrastructure in their own electorates. In the member for Flynn's electorate, that means for the 8 local government areas, $29.6 million. Yes, we did, member for Grainler. Every single one of the 537 councils across Australia is benefiting. If you don't take it from me, ask them. Ask them, because they are benefiting. Now, the 8 councils in the member for Flynn's electorate, as I say, nearly $30 million, and they'll be able to upgrade roads, put a liquor paint on a town hall, get on with it and employ people. That's what the member for Flynn knows.
The Deputy Prime Minister's time has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Since this government came to power in 2013, childcare costs have increased on average by $4,200 a year for Australian families, while wages have stagnated. Wages stagnating, going nowhere, childcare costs going up. Does that make families better off or worse off?
The Prime Minister.
Minister representing the Minister for Education to add to the answer. I simply note that under Labor, childcare fees increased by 53%, Mr Speaker. And since our package of changes were introduced to childcare, Mr Speaker, I've only been going for about 15 seconds, not even that.
I'll call the Leader of the Opposition if he wishes, but I just in fairness, member for Maribyrnong, I can tell is back. Yeah.
He's back, don't worry.
Just because there can only be one point of order on relevance, I was listening to the Prime Minister with his preamble. Yeah, okay, all right. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
On a point of order.
This was a very specific question that went to his government that he leads, the childcare system that he designed, not to any previous government. Not to any previous government. It went to what he is responsible for, which is Australian families being worse off because of his childcare system.
So, as I've said before, the Prime Minister was only a few seconds into the answer, and he was comparing and contrasting, and I'm sure he'd just done the first bit and he was about to move on. That's why I was listening carefully. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, and you indeed perceived correctly, because I'm about to say, Mr Speaker, that under the reforms and changes we introduced to childcare, once they were implemented, the cost of childcare, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, fell by over 3%, Mr Speaker. It actually fell. So when the reforms came in, Mr Speaker, the costs of the design changes that were put in place actually fell by 3%. And, Mr Speaker, that's what they were designed to do, to take that pressure off, to ensure they were targeted, that they were more means-tested, Mr Speaker, and that more broadly the supports and other arrangements we've put in place for a government to support families and hard-working Australians all across the country, that they would continue to be supported by ensuring they paid lower taxes. So, Mr Speaker, that's what our government's been doing, but I'm happy for the Minister to add to the answer.
Thank you, thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you, Leader of the Opposition. What this government has done is make national decisions about families in the national interest. And yes, the cost of childcare for families has come down. Childcare has become more affordable. Our once-in-a-generation reforms have delivered a 3% reduction in out-of-pocket costs to parents since our package was introduced. And more importantly, what they have done is increased female activity levels. This is really important. The proportion of female parents reporting more than 48 hours of activity per fortnight rose from 56% before the introduction of our package to 63% in November last year. Now, Mr Speaker, managing a budget and managing the interests of families are difficult decisions that this government has made well. We did it this way. We had a Productivity Commission review. We took the advice of the Productivity Commission and implemented the recommendations through the parliament, through the process. That review recommended that means-tested and targeted funding be applied to childcare, and that a childcare safety net support those who need it. So, means-tested and targeted, with a childcare safety net to make sure that we support families who need it. Labor's policy is lots of money for the top end of town. Labor has baked in $6 billion for childcare over the next 4 years.
On my left.
And I want to give you one example. A family, Mr Speaker,
Minister will pause for a second. The member for Kingston. The Minister will pause for a second. I'm dealing with the levels of interjection, but what the Minister can't do now, notwithstanding there's only 10 seconds left, is start talking about the opposition's policy, because that was not in the question. The Prime Minister, of course, did so by way of preamble to lead into what the government's response had been. So there was no question about what alternatives were. The Minister has the call.
Well, thanks, Mr Speaker. Labor won't give a tax cut to a worker on $180,000, but they will give them $6,000 a year in subsidised childcare. So
the
what I'm
Minister's
saying—
time has concluded. The member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, I've repeatedly called for the RAAF to use roll-on, roll-off firefighting tank systems. For example, the US MAF system for C-130 Hercules aircraft is available, affordable and quickly deployed. In fact, this idea has now been embraced by the New South Wales Government, which has accepted all 76 recommendations from the bushfire inquiry established after Australia's Black Summer, including that the Commonwealth work with the New South Wales Rural Fire Service to assess the feasibility of equipping our Hercules with such technology. So my questions to you, Prime Minister, are: does your government support this important recommendation, and will you direct the Air Force to immediately implement it?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. I will ask the Minister responsible to reply on behalf of the government.
The Minister for Emergency Management.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question and his interest in this topic. It's important that we all understand that we have a nationally coordinated approach to the determination of the type of aircraft that is brought into this country for bushfires. That is determined by the experts, the fire commissioners from around the country, in terms of the suite of aircraft that's required and the quantity. The federal government has invested just under $26 million a year that will be indexed into the standing costs of those aircraft to be there ready to go at any call's notice. But effectively, it's important. It's important that we listen to the experts and the professionals and not politicians.
The member for Reid.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer please outline how the Morrison government's economic recovery plan is lowering taxes and providing jobs to help families through the challenges of COVID-19, particularly in my electorate of Reid?
The Treasurer.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Reid for her question and acknowledge her prior professional experience as a psychologist, working with children with autism and making a substantial contribution to our community in that regard. Now, Mr Speaker, the member for Reid, like all members on this side of the House, understands that the budget was about one thing: creating more jobs across the Australian economy. In fact, creating nearly 1 million new jobs in the coming years, Mr Speaker. And, Mr Speaker,
members
we
on my
saw
left.
in the response to the budget consumer sentiment increase by 11.9%, Mr Speaker. And we saw consumer confidence increase for 6 consecutive weeks, Mr Speaker. The economic recovery across the economy is underway, but there is still a long way to go. Now, Mr Speaker, in this budget, which was all about creating jobs, we were doing so by tax cuts, bringing forward by 2 years the Stage 2 tax cuts supporting more than 11.5 million Australian workers, providing 2 additional $250 payments to pensioners, to carers, to veterans and others on income support. Backing business, Mr Speaker, recognising that 8 out of every 10 jobs across the economy are in the private sector, by providing an expanded instant asset write-off which allows business to write off machinery and equipment all in year 1, Mr Speaker, and a loss carry-back measure which will be important for previously profitable businesses that became loss-making during COVID. We're bringing forward infrastructure projects as well, Mr Speaker, and cutting red tape and investing in research and development. But, Mr Speaker, while I was in the electorate of Reid the other week, I had the opportunity to visit a local business, a business that is well known to Sydney-siders, Papa's Patisserie, Mr Speaker, in Five Dock. Now, Mr Speaker, an amazing story. Salvatore came to this country, set up a business with just 1 staff member. Today he's employing more than 170 staff. Now, when COVID hit, he saw his revenue and his turnover fall substantially, and he relied on JobKeeper to keep those staff employed, Mr Speaker. But now that the virus has been suppressed, people are coming back through the door and those jobs are back, and he no longer needs JobKeeper, Mr Speaker. This is the success story across Australia as we've built the bridge to the other side of this crisis. Now, I can, Mr Speaker, testify to that baked ricotta cheesecake like so many other Australians. But it's really what Salvatore is doing for so many of his workers and so many other businesses across Australia. JobKeeper has helped them get to the other side so that we can rebuild our economy and secure Australia's economic future.
The member for Bean.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Under the Prime Minister's current childcare scheme, a family with a police officer working full-time and a retail worker on 3 days a week with 2 children in childcare, they'd be no better off if the retail worker took on an extra day of work. Why won't the Prime Minister support Labor's working family childcare boost?
The Minister has the call.
Well,
Minister has the call.
thank you, Mr Speaker. And it's always interesting to paint a cameo where all the circumstances are not known. But there are important points that we need to make about our childcare policy that may have been missed by members of the opposition. And top of the list is that 72% of families pay no more than $5 per hour in daycare centres. 72% pay no more than $5 per hour in daycare centres. And within that subset, 24% pay no more than $2 per hour, because what we have done is get the balance right between the importance of early education and care. Often a significant location for that to be provided is the childcare centre, and affordability is key for those families. And the other end of the spectrum, for example, under Labor's proposal, Mr Speaker, a family on $1 million would get, under the Leader of the Opposition's proposal, for 2 children for 30 hours of care a week, $28,000 a year from the taxpayer. Well, we're proud to say that's a challenge. So we've said that those families can afford childcare. Labor has simply lifted the lid.
Has the Minister concluded? The Minister's concluded her answer. I think the you don't have the call, but of course, as you're well aware, you can address the matters you're seeking to address at the end of question time. And I call the member for LINDSAY.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer outline to the House how the Morrison government's plan for jobs is helping business to get back on its feet, particularly in my electorate of LINDSAY?
Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for LINDSAY for her question and note her experience in the not-for-profit sector before coming to this place and being a great advocate for the people of LINDSAY, Mr Speaker. Now, the member for LINDSAY, like those on this side of the House, understand that the Australian economy has been hit by a once-in-a-century economic shock. A once-in-a-century economic shock, Mr Speaker, that we have responded with unprecedented levels of support. JobKeeper, $101 billion program that, in the words of the Governor of the Reserve Bank, is a remarkable program that has been supporting more than 3.5 million workers, Mr Speaker. JobSeeker, the JobSeeker coronavirus supplement, which has helped cushion the flow. The cash flow boost of $32 billion, supporting small and medium-sized businesses across the country, Mr Speaker, and 2 $750 payments, Mr Speaker, to veterans, to carers, to pensioners and others on income support. Now, Mr Speaker, we recognised in this budget we needed to transition to the next stage of our economic recovery plan, and that's why we put in place tax cuts, Mr Speaker, for more than 80,000 taxpayers in the honourable member's electorate. That's why we are supporting investment, Mr Speaker, in infrastructure projects, as well as supporting businesses to write off major purchases of equipment and machinery. And that's why we're also supporting apprentices, with $1.2 billion to help the hiring of 100,000 new apprentices, Mr Speaker, across the country by providing a wage subsidy of up to 50%. And that is why we've put in place the JobMaker hiring credit, Mr Speaker, to help support 450,000 jobs of young people, Mr Speaker, aged 16 to 35, who may have been unemployed in one of the last 3 months, Mr Speaker. Now, when I went to the honourable member's electorate in LINDSAY, Mr Speaker, I had the opportunity to go to a manufacturing business, Spanset Manufacturing, Mr Speaker, with Christian there and more than 50 employees that is making important safety equipment for construction sites, Mr Speaker. I also met with Frank, who runs a crane company, Mr Speaker, with more than 100 staff. But in both the cases of Frank and Christian, they relied on JobKeeper, Mr Speaker, to keep their employees in place. But now, with the economic recovery underway, now with the business coming back to them and their doors being open as the virus has been suppressed. They no longer need to rely on JobKeeper, Mr Speaker. This is the story right around the country. This is the story right around the country of the government's support for businesses, small, medium and larger-sized businesses, and more than 3.5 million workers across the country. We have built that bridge to help them get to the other side of this virus.
And I call the member for Perth.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Beck from Perth is a solicitor and a mum of 2 who only works 3 days a week because she says working 4 days a week left her worse off under the Prime Minister's childcare scheme. Beck's family has a combined income of $193,000. Why did the government rack up $1 trillion of Liberal debt but do nothing to help women like Beck get ahead by taking on extra hours during the Morrison recession?
The Prime Minister has the call.
I'm asked about why the government has increased the debt at this time, Mr Speaker. That was the question I was just asked, Mr Speaker. I was asked about childcare, and I have given answers already about
Prime Minister will
childcare.
resume his seat. Prime Minister will just pause for a second. He doesn't have to resume his seat. Members on my left, I'm about to start ejecting people. And as was the case with so many questions, there was more than one question asked. If you want the Prime Minister or a minister to focus on the question you deem most important, don't ask more than one in the question. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was asked about childcare. Under our policy, 84% of families are not impacted by the caps in our policy, and the threshold kicks in at around $350,000 a year for a family. They're the caps that kick in for our policy. Our policy is means-tested, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, that is our policy that we put in place that saw childcare costs come down since then. But I'm asked why we have made the investments that we have. The Leader of the Opposition often makes this point, Mr Speaker. I'll tell you why we've invested at this time, because there's a COVID-19 pandemic that has stripped the jobs and livelihoods and, in many cases, lives away from Australians. Now, this might be a mystery to the Leader of the Opposition. I've heard how he talks about the recession, Mr Speaker, and if you don't understand how the country got into recession, then you don't have a clue about how to get out of it, Mr Speaker. And that is the failing of this Leader of the Opposition. This Leader of the Opposition walks around this country as if there has never been a pandemic.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business.
On direct relevance, Mr Speaker, I think it's a pretty long boat to have him still in order at this point.
Yeah, you might think that, but I do take very careful note of the questions. I take my own notes, and if you think I heard something different, now's the time to stand up. But what I've got here is, why did the Prime Minister rack up $1 trillion of Liberal debt and talk about the Morrison recession? So, I mean, if it's in the question, you can't really expect me to insist that it not be referred to. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is why the Australian public do not trust the Labor Party when it comes to whether times are good, Mr Speaker, or times are bad. And times are difficult at the moment, Mr Speaker, and the budget that was handed down by the Treasurer was the budget that Australians need, and it was a budget for all Australians. It's a budget that has given Australians hope and has given Australians confidence. It is a budget that says that Australians should be able to keep more of what they earn, and that businesses who are going to employ people, particularly young people, Mr Speaker, who have been hit 4 times harder through this pandemic recession, that we need to get them back into work as quickly as possible. But still the Labor Party balk at that, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Labor Party will have it each way on every single issue, and that's why the Australian people don't trust him, Mr Speaker. Even those on his own side don't trust him, Mr Speaker. He can't go to Queensland. They won't have him up there, Mr Speaker. And the member for Hunter won't travel all the way from Maitland to Newcastle
from the question. The member for Moncrief.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business. Will the minister outline to the House how the Morrison government is creating the right conditions for small businesses to grow and create jobs as part of our economic recovery plan from the COVID recession?
The Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. And we both know how important small businesses are, and on the Gold Coast it is actually well known that we are the small business capital of Australia. But there are many small businesses right across Australia, and some of those businesses have been doing it particularly tough over the last few months. And that's why our support measures have been such a lifeline to those small businesses. We hear it over and over and over that JobKeeper has allowed businesses to remain afloat. Now, Mr Speaker, our government knows that small businesses are in fact the engine room of our economy, and they are the real job creators that we need to drive our recovery from COVID. And that's why our budget is all about getting the economic conditions right. We need to make sure that we have the right conditions in place so that our small businesses can grow, because when they grow, they employ more people, and that's exactly what we want them to do, and that is exactly what this budget is about. Now, over the last week, I had the opportunity to visit many small businesses across south-east Queensland, and they have welcomed the initiatives in the budget. Some are taking on new apprentices, others are expanding due to the instant asset write-off, others kept their staff during the crisis due to JobKeeper, and they're now on their feet and expanding and no longer need JobKeeper. They're employing new workers, and this is exactly what we want to see, and it's exactly how our budget has helped small businesses right across Australia. It's very obvious that businesses are now energised and they're determined to make the most of our initiatives. So the instant asset write-off, wage subsidies for those who need it, the loss carry forward to keep those who have been impacted afloat, our skills investment, more support for research and development, better access to digital technology and, of course, our modern manufacturing strategy. Now, as COSBOA has said, and they're the representative organisation for small businesses, they said this is the budget we needed to have, and there are some great things in it for small business people. They've recognised, Mr Speaker, that this is such an important next step in developing ways to adapt to the new world in which we find ourselves. Mr Speaker, our businesses have been incredibly adaptive during the challenges that they have faced this year, and that's why the wisest investment that we can make as a government are measures to support small businesses, because they are the engine room of our economy.
The member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Cecilia is a mum of 4 who works as a personal carer in an aged care facility in Mount Eliza. Cecilia says she can't afford to put her youngest daughter in childcare and might have to give up her job. Why is the Prime Minister making it harder for aged care workers to go to work because of the childcare scheme he personally designed?
The Minister has the call.
Well, can I thank the member for Dunkley for her question and for her support of the constituents of Dunkley, and make it very clear through her to those constituents that the government has the interests of the people of Dunkley at heart throughout the pandemic that Victoria is experiencing, which is one of the reasons why we have extended special help to Victorian childcare centres and Victorian families throughout this pandemic. And if I was measuring the success of a childcare system, I would look at a couple of things. I would look at whether the system itself is operating, whether educators have jobs, whether centres remain open, whether parents have access to affordable childcare, whether out-of-pocket costs are going down, whether affordability is a key priority. And I can tell you that this government ticks every single box. And I can reassure the constituents of Dunkley and indeed all of Australia that we have done this properly and we've done this well. Unlike the Labor Party that have waffled on about in the first term of a Labor government we might have an investigation and we hope we might one day get to 90%, but we don't know, because we're not actually coming out with anything solid or anything concrete, even though we've had a long time. Well, you said yes, so what I've done, so what we've had to do is estimate this policy based on the Leader of the Opposition's words.
No, just
but
the minister.
really
The minister needs to pause. No part of the question asked for anything to do with the opposition's policy or alternative policies.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister has the call.
The childcare subsidy is means tested. We're proud of that principle. We believe that people who earn more should pay more. The childcare subsidy is means tested to ensure that those who earn the least receive the highest level of subsidy, up to 85%. Importantly, we have a generous safety net designed to provide higher subsidies to families who are experiencing financial difficulties. We've approached this in a way that uses the Productivity Commission recommendations, that introduces means-tested and targeted childcare, that puts a safety net for families in place, that recognises the unique experiences of the pandemic and looks after every single worker and educator and family in that system.
The member for Ryan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction. Will the minister outline to the House how the Morrison government's plan for jobs includes a gas-led recovery that will deliver the reliable and affordable energy that we need to come out the other side of the COVID recession, and is the minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Energy and Emissions Reduction.
Well, I thank the member for Ryan for his question, and as someone who grew up in a small business family, he knows how important affordable, reliable energy is for small businesses, as well as households and manufacturing right across Australia, Mr. Speaker. Now, a gas-fired recovery is a key part of our JobMaker plan, ensuring Australia is strong coming out of the coronavirus pandemic. Our competitive advantage as a nation has always relied on affordable energy, Mr. Speaker, and we're taking action in three key areas, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that gas is delivered to Australians at the right place, right time, at the right price as well, Mr. Speaker. Now, those three areas are unlocking supply, as we've seen with the Narrabri project recently.
Member for Rankin,
New South Wales government.
Member for McMahon will cease interjecting. The minister has the call.
The New South Wales government has approved the Narrabri project, efficient transportation and pipelines, Mr. Speaker, and empowering customers, making sure Australian gas is working for Australians, Mr. Speaker. Now, gas is a critical enabler of our economy. 850,000 manufacturing jobs in this country, and that includes crucial goods like fertiliser, Mr. Speaker, for food for Australians and people right around the world. PPE for plastics, Mr. Speaker, comes from gas. Now, there's a lot of support for our plan, Mr. Speaker. Business New South Wales has said it is a welcome boost for business. Chemistry Australia says it will support the continued viability of Australian manufacturing, Mr. Speaker, and even the AWU has said anyone who wants to see Australian manufacturing jobs boom should back it, Mr. Speaker. Now, even some members opposite understand that gas is central to delivering affordable, reliable energy, but only some. The member for Hunter loves gas. In response to our plan, he said, "Hallelujah! It's a win-win all round, and it will put downward pressure on energy prices." But, Mr. Speaker, it seems that on that side, if you like gas, you get sidelined. Just last week, the Leader of the Opposition was in the Hunter Valley with all of his Hunter Valley favourites. The member for Newcastle was there, the member for Shortland was there. He was taking time out from running around the countryside supporting the Greens, as the CFMEU has put it. But, Mr. Speaker, you'll be surprised to know that the one person who wasn't there was the member for Hunter. And who can blame him, Mr. Speaker? The truth is, the Leader of the Opposition is paralysed by division and indecision when it comes to gas. While they're focused on themselves, we're getting on with delivering affordable, reliable energy.
Members on both sides, I now give the call to the member for Cooper.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Liz from Reservoir works as a software professional. She and her partner together earn $200,000 and are paying $25,000 a year out of pocket for childcare. Liz says she can't go for promotions at work because she would be expected to work more hours and would lose money paying for more childcare. Why is the government holding back women like Liz from taking on extra responsibility at work?
The Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for her question. As I have already remarked to the House, and as the Minister has also explained to the House, the childcare subsidy program that is put in place by this government, that was changed by this government from that we inherited under the previous Labor government that saw childcare costs increase by 50%, Mr Speaker, resulted in more women in the workforce and the gender pay gap reducing to its lowest level. That's what occurred as a result of the changes that we made to childcare that ensured that childcare costs, out-of-pocket expenses, fell by over 3% after the design changes went in, Mr Speaker. That's what they were designed to do, means-tested, to ensure that those who needed them most, those on low incomes, Mr Speaker, those who were disadvantaged in other ways would get 85% rebates back, Mr Speaker, and there would be no more limits on those who are on those low to middle incomes, up to a combined household income of around $350,000, Mr Speaker. Now, that's what our program was delivering. Our program was targeted and designed to support women in particular get back into work and to be able to earn more. And that's what the facts demonstrate, Mr Speaker. But the other thing that has been helping not only women in the workplace, Mr Speaker, but the men as well, is the fact that under our government they pay less tax. Under our government, the more they earn, Mr Speaker, we are not penalising them. We're not penalising them, Mr Speaker. We're allowing Australians to keep more of what they earn. We took that to the last election. The Australian people endorsed it, Mr Speaker. They endorsed the fact that those earning $45,000 should not pay any more than 30 cents in the dollar in tax, and we brought that into this place and we legislated, and now we know the Labor Party want to claw it back off of them, Mr Speaker. They're not being upfront with the Australian people about this. What you know is when you hear
Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
On direct relevance, Mr Speaker, this question doesn't refer to $1 trillion of Liberal debt. This question doesn't refer to a Morrison recession.
No, the Manager of Opposition Business makes a fair point of order. It didn't ask for alternatives or have, can I say, the range of topics of some previous questions. The Prime Minister has
Speaker, I was simply making the point that all Australians, men and women, benefit from the tax cuts that Australia has now in place and legislated for the future as a result of the bold tax plan that was introduced by the Treasurer and legislated in this parliament. All I know, Mr Speaker, is the more you hear Labor spend, is the more you hear them tax you.
The member for Herbert.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business. Will the Minister outline how the Morrison government's plan for jobs is supporting a skilled workforce to drive the economic recovery by investing in training and apprenticeships?
The Minister for Industry, Science and Technology.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And before I answer that question, and on behalf of every member of this place, can I thank the member for Herbert for his service to our nation in his previous role. I understand that today is his Alive Day and marks 11 years since he was badly injured by an IED in Afghanistan. So overcoming such adversity and going to be an absolute champion for his local community in this place is a testament to his character. He stands up for his constituents, and I'm very proud to have him as a colleague. And I, of course, thank him for his question today, and I know that he's also very passionate about apprenticeships and traineeships, and specifically opportunities to support people in North Queensland, and particularly those school leavers who will graduate, will finish school next month. Now, Mr Speaker, the good news is that anyone looking to enter a trade or continue vocational education now has more support and choice than ever before, because from the start of this health and economic crisis, we've been backing our apprentices and our trainees to make sure that they stay in work and training through our Supporting Apprentices and Trainees wage subsidy. Now, this wage subsidy provides support for about 180,000 apprentices and trainees across 90,000 businesses. It's been essential to help keep young Australians in employment, and it's ensuring we retain the skilled workers we need to drive our economic recovery. But, Mr Speaker, we know that more apprentices are needed to drive that recovery, and that's why in the budget this year we provided an extra $1.2 billion to support 100,000 new apprenticeship commencements. Now, employers will be eligible for up to half the wages for a new or recommencing apprentice or trainee until the end of September next year. This means more opportunity for job seekers and for our young workers about to enter the workforce during this incredible period of uncertainty. But of course, we're also backing those older Australians who want to reskill with our dedicated incentive to encourage adult apprenticeships. And there are currently more than 70,000 apprentices aged 25 to 45 and 15,000 apprentices aged over 45. And in fact, when the Prime Minister was on the Gold Coast last week, he actually met an apprentice who had just become a grandfather when he was at Newman Steel in my electorate. Now, Newman Steel, of course, is a fantastic manufacturing business. They currently employ 6 apprentices and envisage taking on more. Mr Speaker, we have a real plan for Australia's economic recovery.
Has concluded, and I now give the call to the member for McNamara.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Dominique from Port Melbourne works in the higher education sector. She says that half of her pay after tax goes straight to childcare for her 2 children, which is almost the same as the family's weekly mortgage payment. Why did the Prime Minister design a childcare scheme in which fees are so expensive that they cost almost as much as a family's mortgage?
The Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for McNamara for his question and remind him and the families that he represents of the $900 million that we have particularly dedicated to communities in Victoria when it comes to accessing childcare. It's very important that those high-quality early learning and care centres are open at the other side of this pandemic. It's vitally important that the educators are supported, as they are, by JobKeeper, and it's vitally important for the constituents who rely, for the families that rely on childcare, that we as a government care about tax cuts, that we care about giving them back more of their money, that we care about affordability. And that's why, when we designed the childcare system over 2 years ago, we had that very much in mind. We recognise that workforce participation was vital, and, as I said, that was part of the reforms that we had in mind. Now, our tax cuts reinforce these benefits for families because they recognise that there are women who don't have children, who choose childcare outside the system, mums and dads who stay at home, and that's why our tax cuts are supporting those families. The advantage is that they don't impose choices on families. So I just want to mention that, side by side with the early education and care system that we introduced following the reforms in 2018, and make the point, as I have done previously, but Labor doesn't seem to be listening to it, that what we have done is deliver a 3.2% reduction in out-of-pocket costs. What we have done is introduced a means-tested model because we recognise that these are difficult decisions for families, and we should support them in the best way possible. But we should support families on middle and lower incomes for whom childcare can be vital in the development of their children, and that's what we're doing with means testing. And remember that 84% of all families never reach the childcare cap, so the vast majority of families are being extremely well supported by our government. And back to female participation, I want to end on this point, Mr Speaker. In designing the system, of course, female participation in the workforce was vital, and so we're delighted that a proportion of female parents reporting more than 48 hours of activity a fortnight has risen from 56% prior to the introduction of the package to 63% in November last year. And we will continue to work with the wonderful people who are part of our early education and care system as we support them, their families and the people that the member represents.
The member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is guaranteeing the essential services that Australians rely on through the provision of increased access to vital mental health services and support?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Higgins, who, as a nationally leading paediatric researcher, understands essential services and understands in particular that the provision of mental health is one of the most essential of services that Australia can provide. In particular, in any one year we know that mental health is a challenge for all of us, in all of our electorates. 4 million Australians have some form of mental health challenge. This year, of course, it has been harder than at any time since the Second World War. We have seen in the 4 weeks just finished a 31% increase in Medicare mental health services in one state alone, in Victoria. We've seen a national increase of 14%, and outside of Victoria that national average was balanced out by an 8% increase in New South Wales and 7% average across the other 6 states. So what we can see is that there is a profound impact across the country, but in particular in Victoria at roughly 4 times the rate of growth of other states. And that's a significant and undeniable consequence that we all have to address and recognise and respond to. At the same time, when we look at the comparison of Kids Helpline, we see a 31% increase in Kids Helpline services in Victoria as opposed to other states and territories, and a 77% increase in Beyond Blue services in Victoria as opposed to the rest of the country. So against that basis, what we've done is we've invested $5.7 billion in the budget, an increase of $500 million in mental health services to help meet these needs, to support these needs, to add to the capacity that's available. Telehealth in particular has been made available with now well over 35 million services, of which we see that mental health is a very major component. In addition to that, what we've also seen is, beyond telehealth, the addition of $100 million for doubling the Medicare Better Access services in Australia for psychological support. And then in Victoria, where there's an additional need, there's $44 million which has been put over and above everything else. And that includes $17 million for services such as Beyond Blue and Kids Helpline, to provide that support, to provide that belief that we can get through this most difficult of lockdowns in that state. And what we see as well is that we've set up and we're operating 15 new head-to-help clinics in Victoria, set up over a period of 3 weeks. All of these things are helping to protect and support the mental health of Australians.
Has concluded, and I call the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Lauren is a nurse from Bendigo and a mum of 2 who says she can only work 2 shifts per week because the cost of extra childcare is too high for her and her family. Why did the Prime Minister design a childcare system which holds back nurses in regional areas from taking on more work?
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And when the government designed the changes to our childcare system, which would see the amount of rebate for those on lower middle incomes rise to 85% from where it was, a set of changes that saw the out-of-pocket expenses for childcare fall by over 3%, that saw the rate of female participation in the workforce increase and the gender pay gap fall to lows, Mr Speaker. When we put that proposal in a bill to this parliament, the Labor Party actually opposed it. They opposed it, Mr Speaker. They didn't want to see those changes put in place. They wanted the previous system that they had run, which had been failing families, and that had been pointed out by the Productivity Commission that recommended that means testing remain an important part of this process. And we took that advice and we put those arrangements in place. But we knew that there's more that you've got to do to support Australian families and Australians working around this country. What you have to do is ensure that they get to keep more of what they earn, Mr Speaker, by paying less tax. They need to work in an economy, particularly when it's been so hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, Mr Speaker, a point that has completely mystified the Leader of the Opposition. He thinks the pandemic has played no role in the recession. None at all. He thinks it's all the product of government policies. He must be the only person in the country who seems to think that is the case, Mr Speaker. But that demonstrates, if you don't know how you got into the recession, Mr Speaker, you don't know how you get out, and that explains the Leader of the Opposition. But that's why our policies, Mr Speaker, have been investing in getting all of these Australians back into jobs. 760,000 jobs coming back that have been lost during this COVID-19 pandemic recession, Mr Speaker, that are jobs that have either gone or reduced to 0 hours. Every single day through this crisis, our government has demonstrated that we've stood by those who are working people of this country, those who have lost their jobs and those who need to stay in their jobs. And as I've moved around the country, particularly since the budget, Mr Speaker, Australians understand that. And they know that this government is doing everything it can to get Australians back into work and give them those opportunities, and that as the budget plan, which is a recovery plan to come out of this COVID-19 recession, then kicks over into building our economy for the future, whether it's in manufacturing or it's in the energy sector or the many other sectors that will get more and more people back into jobs, Mr Speaker. That's what's giving Australians hope. That's what's giving Australians hope, Mr Speaker, and that's why there has been such a strong response from Australians to the budget that the Treasurer has handed down, because it is a plan for Australia to get out of this COVID-19 recession. That's what Australians needed. That's what Australians have got from this government, Mr Speaker.
The member for Bass.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Will the Attorney update the House on how the Morrison government's budget is providing additional support for Australia's legal system to help people, particularly in family law proceedings, deal with the pressures of the COVID recession?
The Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question and for her excellent work in advocating for funding in her electorate of Bass. And I'll be speaking about $140 million worth of investment in Australia's legal system, but it's probably appropriate to start by saying that we were very pleased in the 2021 budget that we were able to provide $5.4 million in funding for the Launceston Family Court and its registry. That's going to improve the security there, the experience for all of the families in the members' electorate, and that funding would not have happened but for your advocacy, Member for Bass. That was part of more than $140 million in investment in the legal system that was announced in the 2020 budget, and much of that was directed towards the family law system and improving the system for Australians. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, Mr Speaker, as the Treasurer has noted, a once-in-a-generation economic shock has put enormous pressure on Australian families right across the country, and sadly the consequences of that pressure have at points been that families will need more assistance from government services, both court services directly but also services that aid the courts and divert matters indeed from the courts. And it's notable that actually during the peak of the COVID crisis we acted immediately by providing an additional $63.3 million in funding for frontline legal services to respond to COVID-19 earlier this year. That included $20 million for matters involving family violence. It included $13.5 million so that services could be delivered virtually and remotely. And whilst it wasn't without its stresses, the court system, with that extra funding, managed to cope very well, I think, during that period and help and support families. Then, in addition to that $63.3 million, $140 million worth of investment in this budget, and that included, for instance, provision of $87 million towards continuing family law services, which are critical at a time when families are dealing with the impacts of COVID. And in fact, Family and Relationship Services Australia said of that funding, the reality of that funding commitment by the government is that we can now keep our doors open and avoid significant job losses. This would see a collective sigh of relief from both those workers and the 100,000 Australians they help who otherwise would not have been able to access family and relationship services. So that additional funding goes right to services around the country, including those providing counselling to separating families. Also in this budget, we've invested in our courts with $35.7 million, with increased funding for the Federal Circuit Court. That will see matters resolved faster, more efficiently, including family law cases. That's 4 additional judges, 5 family law registrars, and another $2.5 million supporting the Family Court and Federal Circuit Court to continue to operate their specialist national COVID-19 lists. So this was a budget which, aside from the very many large macroeconomic matters, focused in on families and particularly this area in family courts and family law.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Prime Minister, and I ask, isn't childcare a productivity measure which boosts economic growth?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, that is why the government invested $9.2 billion in our childcare changes that lifted female workforce participation to record levels, Mr Speaker, that to reduce the gender pay gap in this country down to lows, Mr Speaker. That is why we invested in it. That's why we put the changes in place. So the only question is, Mr Speaker, why did the Labor Party oppose it when we brought it into this place? Why would they do that, Mr Speaker? The design of the program, which was originally called Jobs for Families, was called that because it did just that. It got Australians into jobs. It got a record number of women into jobs, Mr Speaker. And I tell you what, we are a government that believes in getting Australians into jobs, and we are a government that has demonstrated that. Before we hit the COVID-19 recession, which is a mystery to the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker, before we hit that recession, 1.5 million Australians got back into work. And they got back into work, and they got off welfare, and they got back into work. We had a 30-year low in those working age population Australians who were dependent on welfare, Mr Speaker. The reason why I believe, Mr Speaker, that Australians have demonstrated and shown such clear trust in our government during these difficult times is because they've seen us deal with the economic challenges that Australia has faced in the past. They've seen this government put in place policies that have got Australians back into work. Mr Speaker, they have seen this government get a budget back into balance, getting people off welfare and into work. So when the crisis hit, Mr Speaker, our government could respond in the way we did, and we have responded, Mr Speaker, in a way that Australia has never seen before. And as a result of those actions, millions of Australians kept their jobs. Mr Speaker, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of businesses were able to keep on, just like Caboolture Spanish Pears, Mr Speaker, up there in Caboolture. A business, Mr Speaker, that was going to have to put workers off has been able to keep workers on and employ more workers now in a smash repairs business, Mr Speaker, that is now going forward. That's what our budget is doing. That's what our economic management is doing now, Mr Speaker. Those opposite are not trusted by the Australian people on these issues because their form is well understood. By contrast, Mr Speaker, they know.
Prime Minister resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business on
direct relevance. There was nothing in the question about alternative policies. The Prime Minister shouldn't feel a need to look down to people at the end of every answer.
No, I don't need the commentary, but the substance of the point of order is correct. There was nothing about alternative policies in it. I was about to say the Prime Minister's straying from the question.
After these years the Leader of the Opposition has been in this role, Mr Speaker, I haven't seen an alternative policy, Mr Speaker, yet that there's anything to speak of that he can pay for.
The member for Cowper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management. Will the Minister outline how the Morrison-McCormack government's plan for jobs is supporting the Australian agriculture industry achieve its target of $100 billion in farm gate output by 2030?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Cowper for his question and acknowledge the contribution that the Cowper electorate will make towards agriculture's ambitious goal of $100 billion by 2030. And part of our budget was to actually clearly articulate our plan to support agriculture to achieve that goal. And it has 7 key pillars in making sure we not only protect the 270,000 Australians who work in agriculture, but grow more jobs within agriculture, and particularly in regional rural Australia. The first pillar is around exports, making sure we continue to invest in the modernisation of our export system, having single touch, getting the paperwork out of people's lives and making it more a digital approach. Getting rid of 200,000 certificates that we issue in a paper base, going back to just issuing them digitally,
compromising nothing in terms of our biosecurity, $873 million record spend in biosecurity and protecting brand Australia. Also, with respect to the stewardship of our land, is the third pillar that we want to make sure that we investigate ways to reward farmers for the stewardship of their land, and in fact there was an extra $14 million to explore soil carbon in the role that farmers actually undertake in that. We're also looking at infrastructure. Key pillar of our agricultural plan is around investing in water, plumbing the nation, making sure we add the water. We'll actually grow the productivity. The story of agriculture is just to add water. On top of that, the $1.3 billion in manufacturing, making sure that we look to go further through supply chains here in the agricultural sector, and also the roads, $1 billion in roads.
Member for Griffith.
Building on the connectivity and the rail right across this country in getting our product to plate as quickly as possible. We're also looking at innovation, making sure that we're modernising our innovation systems and those levy collectors, ensuring that there's more transparency on them, in getting those levies back to the RDCs, into the research and development, so there's greater accountability, more money going back to those research and development, investing in the smarts. And we're investing in our people, a significant investment in education, reducing agricultural courses by 62% to get the next generation of young people into agriculture. But we've also understood there's pressures right here, right now, in understanding that we have a shortage of seasonal workers, and we've said to every Australian, these jobs must be market tested first. Australians get first crack at these. And then we've up to $6,000 is being made available for travel costs to get around this vast nation to help support farmers. But we've also said to young Australians, this is your opportunity to lend a helping hand. We've said to them, we can accelerate your pathway to youth allowance. Go out and work in agriculture. Agriculture alone, I know $15,000, and you will accelerate to youth allowance. So you'll go back to uni, or you'll go to uni with money in your pocket for O Week, but you'll accelerate your way into youth allowance. Farmers have a real opportunity after this prolonged drought to make a real difference to our national economy, and now's an opportunity for every Australian to give a helping hand.
The minister's time has concluded. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The clock has beaten the Shadow Treasurer again. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
The Leader of the